Yeah. So we're not
right? We can still talk,
co-hosting, but we can still chat, and you're still
but
here.
you have more
All
you have
my
more power.
all my minions can see you. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, my face is bigger instead of yours. Probably be preferable, but we'll make do.
Don't worry about
So
it. At least I'm here. Like last time we tried this, like we couldn't get in, and
yeah.
it was crazy, and we had to jump to Instagram, but now we can do it.
Okay. All right. So um, we've got like at least 30 people on now. So why don't you just introduce yourself to everybody who maybe don't know who you are?
Okay. So let me see. Let me just make sure my camera's okay. So I'm Lisa. I'm the female half of Been There Got Out. My partner Chris is at somewhere else. He was going to try and record this, but I don't think he can. He's the male half of Been There Got Out, and our goal is to provide expert strategic guidance to people struggling in high conflict relationships, divorce, um, custody battles, and co-parenting hell, so that they can have the chance of the best outcome in court and beyond. And we run a weekly legal abuse support group, and then we have individual clients as well for coaching.
Okay. Oh, great, great. And also it's Chris says he's on.
Oh,
So and by the way, I think I can download if you guys want, I can download once this is all set the video. So if you want it, I know you guys like to keep those.
yeah, we
So
do. And some of our Instagram followers are like, I'm not on TikTok. Like, how could I see it? So that would
yeah.
be wonderful.
I'll download it and send it to you when we're done. But
Okay, great. Oh my God, someone I
and
see is 13 years in court. Yeah.
he takes me back. How can I stop that? I don't know. The methods with which to stop him are ones I can't really suggest, legally speaking. It unfortunately, that's the situation that you're dealing with. And someone else asked me, child support. Child's now 18 and they owe 91,000, or someone owns 91,000. What happens when the child turns 18? They still owe it. Just keeps gathering interest, so it doesn't change.
Yeah, they still owe it, but then you have to go back and get it.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
that's
dealing
the
with.
challenge, right? It's great to have an order for child support, and now you got to go and enforce it. So,
Right, right. And we always tell people too, you can have great orders like I have, but then enforcement is a whole other matter.
right, yeah. So it's been a while. It's been like a month since you and I spoke, right?
Uh-huh. Except for our little messages.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, but live online, it's been a while. So,
Yeah.
um, but it's nice to see your face. And I know what we wanted to talk about today specifically was parenting plans. Go over different parenting plans. Hey, Mrs. Anders. I know that's not your name, but and yes, Dad still has to pay support when he's on disability. So the yeah, I don't know where to start, but I was thinking about this. I was walking. I was actually giving Rocky a walk, my golden retriever,
Oh,
taking him
that's
for
right.
a
You and I
walk.
both have golden retrievers.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I just took Rocky for a walk. Uh, so the walk. My office is right by the local high school here in Davis, and so our walk is oftentimes on the same path that the high school students take to go over to the shopping center and get lunch before they come back. And so, unfortunately, they're high school students, so a lot of them just drop their garbage. Not all of them, I'm not painting them all with that brush, but enough of them do that there's always some scraps on the ground somewhere. And sure enough, today, Rocky got himself half a sandwich. I think it was a PB and J. I'm not sure, but he was pretty thrilled about that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking while I was walking, I was like, well, you know, what to talk about. One of the most common questions I get about parenting plans is, what do you do with like a relocation, right? Like we live states away, or we live like so far away from each other. Like what kind of parenting plan is best for that? And I think it all depends. A lot of it depends, obviously, on other factors like domestic violence and the age of the children, and do the children have special needs? Are there substance abuse issues? all those types of factors. But, all things being equal, hey, great to see you too, Luna Family Law. And one of the, all things being equal, obviously one of you is going to be the school year parent, one of you is going to be the not so school year parent, the more of the summer, winter break, spring break, some of the other long weekends parent. I mean, that's just naturally what's going to happen. But what I find really funny oftentimes is I get a lot of pushback from clients who either want to relocate or already have relocated, and they're asking me all the time, like, well, what do you mean I have to give up so much time in the summer? And what do you mean, that's the downtime. Like, that's the time I want to, or the winter break or Thanksgiving break or spring break. Like, I want that time. I want to have downtime too. So it's finding that medium between, obviously you're not going to give the other parent all of the downtime, but there's going to be a significant portion because they don't have any of the school year time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if people talked about that with you in your work with them, or does that come up?
Yeah. So a lot of times we have people who want to do a relocation, and then, other experts that we've talked to have said that's sometimes tricky because, while the divorce is in the process, one of the factors that we know judges look at is what the other parent's going to do to encourage the relation, what the parent's going to do to encourage the relationship with the other parent. And
Mm-hmm.
so our people say, whatever it is, however it works out, you always want to make yourself appear reasonable. So the situation just mentioned, I'm thinking if somebody can't negotiate that out and it goes before a judge, then of course they should think about, like, if I get the whole school year with the kids, then the summer is, a lot of times it has to go to the other parent. But that's hard.
It is hard. It is hard, and it's not typically the whole summer. I've rarely seen a case where, and this might work differently in other places, but I've rarely seen a case where the judge says, okay, you have the school year, and the other parent, when school lets out to when school comes back, the other parent has the kid. But maybe most of it, save for like 2 weeks, maybe they'll say, okay, well, during the summer they can come to you for a couple weeks, but the rest of it is with the other parent. So it really, yeah, it really depends. Or, winter break, oftentimes an easy thing to do is everybody gets a week during winter break. And that's usually fine. But so one I've seen is like spring break, parents will be like, well, I want to alternate that. I'm like, yeah, but, the other parent never sees the kids during the school year. Why wouldn't you offer to let them have spring break every year? Like, that's a huge, nice week-long break a few months before summer starts, and you have the kids all the time. So why wouldn't you offer that up? And just like you said, by not being able to give up a part of this stuff, the parent that's leaving oftentimes seems so unreasonable that they're really torpedoing their own relocation case.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, we always, again, like, there's all these factors that judges look at, and that seems to be the number one thing. So if you're going to argue, well, to me, it seems like if someone's not appearing reasonable, then that's basically building a case against them. If it's we deal with all these high conflict situations where the other parent can say, look, that person's trying to alienate me from the kids. They already get them this much time of the year, and then they won't even let me have a little bit of time, in the
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah,
Because we think that, go ahead.
No, I was going to say here in California, we call them the La Mouget factors because they all come from this case La Mouget, and actually, Mr. La Mouget actually comes to some family law conferences still because this isn't that old of a case. Because we had an older case where we had similar factors, but that one kind of took over, and but that's when we do these cases in California, that is probably the most important factor is that the court looks at, maybe not in every case, but very often, is which parent is more likely to encourage a relationship with the other parent. If you're the parent that is known for being somewhat alienating, known for maybe not connecting those phone calls at 6 o'clock that you're supposed to do on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or or not, or coming up with any excuse necessary not to complete the exchanges the way they're supposed to. Whatever technicality you can come up with, dad was 10 minutes late to the exchange, so you canceled the whole weekend. You know, whichever parent does those things, when it's time to relocate, the court's like, yeah, but if I let you go, you know, 2,000 miles away, now you're really going to have your druthers to keep the other parent out of the child's life. If you've already been doing it, then I really can't trust that you're going to, you know, because again, it's not so much not getting in the way. You need to engender the relationship. Instead of not connecting the call at 6 o'clock, how about reminding your kid it's 6 o'clock, it's time to call the other parent? How about if the other parent's having transportation issues, how about calling them and saying, hey, how can we work around this to make sure that you have your time with the children? You know, are you that parent? Because if you're that parent, your relocation is going to be is going to be a done deal. But yeah, that factor is like so critical in relocations.
Yeah, I think in general too, the thing that we emphasize to our people or everybody who's still involved with kids under 18 years old is that, you know, if you're always under like a microscope of the court, not that everybody's watching you, but you know, like if you're in a difficult situation, you always have to behave as if this could come back out as evidence. You know, so you always want to appear reasonable, especially in your written communications, even though you don't feel that way to the person. Presentation is very, very important. And we know that judges and many experts involved in custody cases want to believe, and so therefore you have to present, that kids deserve a strong, healthy bond with both parents. And that becomes an issue sometimes, or all the time, in like abuse cases where someone will be like, but look at how bad that person was to me. Like, I want to keep the kids away. But then when it comes to actually looking at custody and parenting, you know, a lot of times in our experience, and I always say, like, I'm an attorney, so you certainly know more than I do, but that custody, it's more of like, how does that person's behavior affect the child? You know, so all the stuff that happened between you isn't going to matter as much when it comes to the parental rights to see the child on a regular basis, unless there's some proof of some egregious stuff, and then that affects the case. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that can be it can be difficult to work around that. I mean, there are a lot of other factors. It's not the only one, right?
Right.
And I would say probably the second biggest one is the reasons for the move. You know, having good reasons. Why is it that you want to relocate? Very oftentimes it's just, especially here, I'm in a college town in California. It's a very, what do you call it? Transient. Not everybody, but there's a significant transient population, not in the negative context, but people come here because either they're going to the university or they're working there, but it's a you know, a contract gig to work for the university, or they were a postdoc, but now they're going to work in private industry somewhere else or whatever. So there's a certain level of transience here, but so is it for work? Is it because your spouse got a new job? Is it? But a lot of these people don't have any support system here because they moved here for someone else's work, and so they're like, well, I don't have anybody here. I'm the primary parent. I need to be somewhere where, you know, grandma's nearby, can help out. So those are all good reasons.
I was just about to say, what are some really good reasons? Because we actually we were talking with a client today in Canada who wants to move from one part of the country to another, and we were saying, you know, let's think about what you can say to the judge, like your reason for moving. It's not like you don't want to say, I just want to get away from this person, because that's going to make you look bad. And that's going to make
that is the worst thing. And I see someone talking about a bad faith move, and that's what we call that. Is the other side is always trying to show that it's a bad faith move away, and the one set of words you never want to come out of your mouth to anyone is, what I really want to do is just get this kid as far away from the other parent as possible.
That's exactly what our person was saying. We're like, you know, she's like, I want to protect my daughter, and I'm like, no, you cannot say anything like that. It's not just your child, and that's gonna make people upset. Like, you're gonna get the opposite if you say things like that.
And you know what, if I was your friend and we were in the bar talking about that, I might agree with you. I'd be like, I think you should get that kid away from as far away from that person as possible. The problem is if you send that to me in a text message, that might be discoverable. And I actually had a case a couple years ago where the other person was able to gather through discovery messages that the mom had with her friends about the relocation. And sure enough, that's what she was saying in the relocation was, I can't stand this guy. I just want, I just want to raise this child on my own. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
want his interference, etc. And it was very clear that that was her purpose for the relocation. So she sort of dropped it for the time being because she realized how much like I said, she kind of torpedoed her case through all of those communications. So it has to
Yeah.
be for the right reasons.
I'm glad that you also, I know this is not directly related to parenting agreements, but that you mentioned discovery, because that was also a surprise to me in my own case where it was like, yeah, and we share with our clients like your text messages, your calendar, your private journals, your emails. I know when
Hmm.
I was getting divorced, my ex's attorney, just bombarded us with discovery requests, and she's like, if there were any emails where his name was mentioned, you have to show them. So here, luckily it was fine, but you think you have all this privacy, but when you have an open case, you have to understand that again, you're under that court's microscope and your behavior could be pulled and used against you. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. So for anybody who's joined recently, I'm here with Lisa who's one half of Been There, Got Out, and they help individuals dealing with high conflict custody cases, and they've been coming along the last couple of months on TikTok, but their real presence is on Instagram. So please check them out on Instagram. I know I've gotten a lot of followers on Instagram that were really fed by the lives that I did with you. Like, I think I
Really?
had
Oh, I'm
like
so
a
glad.
hundred. No one really. I mean, I had it, but no one really followed me on Instagram. And then all of a sudden, by doing that live with you, like all of a sudden, I have all these people I don't know following me. I don't really do a lot of this type of content on there. You're welcome to
Uh-huh.
look at pictures of me and my dog and my kids. But I don't really do a whole lot. Sometimes I repost some of my TikToks, but I just don't have the time to be like, oh, I'm going to do this one for TikTok and then I'm going to do another thing for Instagram or something. So, but I
That's
know
great.
you guys are.
Brian, one of our clients said she actually tried to hire you, but I don't know if it was something with the area, but she said your office was really helpful because you referred her to somebody else and that worked out.
Oh,
That
good,
was great.
good, excellent. And
Yeah.
we do get quite a number of people that do contact us from TikTok, which it was never the purpose of doing this, and it's still not the purpose of doing it. But if we're able to help people, that's that's great. So yeah, so we're coming on today to talk about parenting plans. We got into sort of a segue into relocations because
Yeah.
I think because those are some of the most difficult parenting plans to do is when people live so far away from one another, trying to come up with a parenting plan, and especially I had a case a few years. I still have a case. I still have this case. And it started off kind of high conflict, but they get along enough. But uh, mom basically, while she was pregnant, they were living out on near the coast here in California, and then she moved closer to here in Davis. It was a good 4-hour hike, and you're talking about an infant. So dad, how does dad establish a real, legitimate parenting plan with an infant child in a city 4 hours away? Was a real challenge. And but that's another additional challenge is when you have infants because you can't do week on week off with your newborn. I'm sorry, but that's I see especially men on social media talking about it should be 50-50 no matter what, 50-50. I'm like, how do you do 50-50 with a newborn? Like, explain that to me. Show me the logistics of how your newborn 50-50 parenting plan is going to work.
Yeah, actually, you remind me of a couple of things. I was going to ask you. I'll save the second one, but the first one is like we have a couple of clients too they have infants who are being breastfed, and the other, the father, because obviously it's the woman, the father is really pushing for time, and one of, sometimes it's not just about breastfeeding and feeding the child. There's like that whole bonding experience, and it's really,
Yeah.
the woman gets like very, very upset because she feels like the infant is being harmed, not abused, but harmed from not being able to have the overnights. And so sometimes we talk about a step-up plan, again, to appear reasonable, like to try to say to the judge, certainly I don't want to deny him his rights to bond with our baby, but because she's so little, or the baby's so little, and they're still breastfeeding, like, is it reasonable to ask for that no overnights until the baby is, for example, 2? Like, what do you think about that, or do you have any experience with that?
I don't know about no overnights until the child is 2. Um, I've seen judges and to some extent child custody mediators as well, because they play a significant role in that, I think. Different attitudes about breastfeeding, and then the necessity for that. I think there was this presumption for a long time that breastfeeding was the optimal situation for a child. But a lot of that research has been debunked in the last few years by individuals who were able to show that when you controlled for all of the other external circumstances in a child, because what the research had shown is, children that were breastfed from this date to this date had this type of success level in life in terms of secure relationships with significant others, staying out of criminal trouble, having productive jobs, graduating college, et cetera, et cetera. What other researchers had done was went and basically selected for all of the other types of influences, for instance, economics, of where these children were actually from, and other types of resources that they had available, and were able to show that actually breastfeeding had, if anything, a negligible effect on children's success levels. Now, does that necessarily mean that it's better or worse for a child to breastfeed? I don't know. I mean, you could argue that it's the not just the food, obviously, but the bonding, the attachment, etc. So there's certainly some good arguments to make there. But judges are keenly aware, I think, again, because people use all of these things so cynically, they've caused the bench to become cynics. So the second someone uses breastfeeding in a way to bar a parent, bar father from establishing a more regimented parenting schedule with a newborn, the second a judge has one case where it's obvious that that's what mom's doing, they're going to always be looking at all the moms with the same lens. They're going to say, I got to protect for the possibility that you're doing that. So I respect the breastfeeding. 2 years is quite a while. You can pump, you can supplement with formula. That doesn't mean you have to give up breastfeeding. It doesn't mean that you can't comfort the child during your parenting time. But during dad's parenting time, formula is a healthy formula, is a perfectly good supplement for a child, so that they can eat during father's parenting time, and et cetera. But certainly when the child's like really young, in those first 6 months, there's more consistency with maybe one parent, and then it opens up from there, I think.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. And I'm going to go back and tell this client about that, the perspective of the judge, and how people often in difficult cases, because, even though I know you deal with all cases, but we just deal with more difficult cases, but when it's used as a weapon to bar someone their rights, and their chance to bond with the child, that it would make a judge more cynical. Okay, so my other question was, now with the age of COVID and parenting plans, there seems to be a lot more video visiting, like video calls and Zoom calls as part of parenting time. How do you know how people can handle, like, with little kids, like toddlers? Because a lot of our people are like, I'm trying to get the kid to go on the visit and the kid won't, and then I'm being blamed for not making the 2-year-old sit in front of the computer, and he's like screaming and having a tantrum. Like, what do I do?
I always just tell people to do their. I always just tell people, do your best. I have people that say, well, he doesn't want to be on the screen. I'm like, but did you even attempt the call? Well, no, because I know he doesn't want to do it. I'm like, I can't help you. You didn't even try. You didn't even I don't care if, at least for like 30 seconds, you take the thing and you put it in front of their face and complete the call. And it's like, well, then the judges are understanding that, yeah, okay, a 2-year-old isn't going to sit there looking at a face on an iPad for more than a couple minutes. But if you use that fact to just not even do the call, then it's not gonna be well. But usually the orders I've seen from judges are usually like, for children that young, for 2, 3, 4 years old, they'll say that you're supposed to do the call and the up to 15 minutes or as long as the child's attention can be held. And that's a very common order that I've seen for children that young. So yeah, it's difficult with the video visits for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I also wanted to ask you about parenting plans. Like some of our people say, like, we have this parenting plan that we got when the child was really little, and it doesn't work anymore. And my ex isn't being reasonable. Like, do they have to go back to court, or what are some, are there options to tweak it if one person is being difficult?
More or less, you just have to go to court if you can't come to an agreement, right? Like, I get that question quite frequently. That's like one of the most common questions I get on TikTok. If such and such is and we can't come to an agreement, what do we do? And the answer, I'm always gonna just write in the comment: you go to court. You go to court.
Yeah.
You go to court. Either you guys have an agreement or you go to court. Unfortunately, it's the only thing you can do. And I know a lot of people like to avoid court. I think one of the problems that people have, or one of the challenges that people are trying to avoid, is I want to make this small change to the parenting plan. But if I drag the other person into court, now I've triggered them to have a whole bunch of other ideas about how to change it.
I call it opening the can, opening the can of worms.
Yes, exactly. Opening the can of worms. And so it's like, is it worth this worm that I want to have to address all of these other ones? Right now, that's why I have a lot of people that come to me all the time. They're saying, dad only has, or mom or whatever, the other parent only has the 10% parenting time, and they don't even show up for that. What do I do? And I'm always like, nothing. I mean, what is it you want to happen? They already only have 10%. Do you want to go to 5? Like, what? It's then just leave it at the 10. Like, what do you have to gain by going to court? He can only get more. It's only going to end up with, do you want to just say 0? What would be the point? Where would you benefit out of that? So I know it's hard though, because you do want that. It's reasonable to want that small change, and definitely try to work it out with them that you can, or maybe exchange something, trade something, one for the other.
Yeah. What was I going to say? What are some of the most common things that you find are an issue with the parenting plans where people end up back? Like that maybe somebody forgot to consider.
I mean, the biggest thing is having, oftentimes we go in and we draft parenting plans and we're like, there's a little bit of there's always something that's a little vague. Almost always there's a little something that you leave open, and you're always like, they can discuss that, like, sometimes even it's something that other parents would be like, oh my God, that has to be well defined. But like an exchange location, it's like, some people don't need to have that. They're just like, yeah, we can work out an exchange location. And then a year later, somebody moved. So now, that would be a big one. So right now the exchange location is halfway. So someone moves and the court order says that's the exchange location, right? Even though they've moved like an hour away, and the other parent's like, well, I'm not going any further. That's what the order says. That's what the order says. And it's like, well, maybe, you could work together. But so usually it's something that's vague in the order. One I was thinking about recently, because I was trying to draft a parenting plan for someone in a high conflict relationship. And one that comes up is, what we'll oftentimes put in a parenting plan is like, okay, so for the holidays, each parent gets 1 week during winter break. Seems simple enough, right? Like you both get one, parent A gets week 1, parent
Not
B
to
gets
me
week
hearing
2.
it like that.
Right. To
For
me,
normal
that
people,
seems
yes.
really simple. Or you could even say parenting. So there's 2 weeks. School ends on Friday, starts Monday, 2 weeks later. Exchanges on the Sunday that starts week 2. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That seems simple enough, right? When does winter break start? Because I had that weekend, and they're saying that week 1 starts on Friday when school lets out. And I'm
Right.
saying that no, it starts on Monday because that's when the school calendar says it's spring break. What do we do? Um, so I was doing this recently, or I mean, that's winter break. What do we do? And so recently, what I was doing was I was drafting a parenting plan in a case, and I was spelling it out. I was saying, winter break starts. What I put in there was the Monday, the first Monday that they have off from school from 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 the next Monday is week 1. 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. the next week. That's week 2, and that so
Right.
whoever had that weekend still has that weekend, and that's it. But I'm like, the fact that I have to write this is not good.
But
But
Brian, I think you having to write that, I think that's so important because we have like everyone that we deal with has issues just like that, and we find that the language in these agreements and parenting plans has to be specific. Not that every detail has to be, but things like what you said and having to put that in. I think it's better that you did that
yeah,
because what I was going to say, the word reasonable is very difficult in a parenting plan for our people. Like
reasonable. Yeah,
anything, take out the word reasonable, like make it specific or put actual.
yeah, yeah. Actually, somebody, yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, somebody asked me last night. I think it was because there's a checkbox on the visitation form of reasonable right of visitation to the parent without custody. What is a
Mhm.
reasonable right of visitation? I was like, your
Yeah.
guess is as good as mine. What's reasonable to you? I
Yeah.
guarantee it's not the same as what's reasonable to him.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
but
Right.
uh, but yeah, so that's typically why people have to go back is well, for two major reasons, I would say. One is because of something in the order that's a little vague and they need clarification. Um, and number two is just children get older, right? And I see this go on in two kinds of cases. One where you already have a very young child. So as the child gets older and older, like the case I was talking to you about where they lived 4 hours away when the child was an infant, dad comes back like every 9 months like clockwork to adjust the parenting plan for the age of the child, which is probably pretty smart. That's what I would suggest. He's actually the other party, but that's what I would suggest if it was my client. I would say, keep going back, keep showing you want a little bit more and a little bit more. But when the child is, a little more closer to school age, you're closer to 50-50. So that's one reason. The other reason too is, if a parent is either it has been out of a child's life for a long time,
Mm.
whether it's through domestic violence or just straight up dropped off the face of the map. They come back in the child's life. Well, it's going to be slow, right? It's going to start with some kind of reunification counseling and then supervised visits and then unsupervised visits, but they're short and then they're longer and then they're overnight and then it's a whole weekend and then it's et cetera. So there's going to be these 6 month check-ins or even shorter sometimes to keep that going. So that's when people are frequently in having to go back to court over and over again
I
on
know, and
stuff
so
like that.
expensive. I was going to
It is.
say, I think you might have talked about this in one of your videos in the past, but I'm wondering if you could again talk about the right of first refusal, because I think people think that that's like a really big deal. And I caught him, like he went out with his girlfriend and he didn't offer me the kids, and now I'm going to take him to court. And I think someone just said that recently. I said, I don't think that they really pay that much attention to that. What do you think about that?
Not really. I mean, maybe with a pattern of it, of
Mhm.
a pattern of constantly um, not using it. If you can show, if you can, that's, I mean, one of the biggest issues is just proving it, right? Like, how do you know that they were gone? You know, the right of first refusal. First of all, the first right of refusal, for anybody who doesn't know, just means that when parent A, when either parent isn't going to have the child for a certain amount of time because they got to work or they're going to go out, and the time is flexible. So the court order will say if it's 3 hours or 4 hours, or I've seen them as long as 24. I had a case where the guy would travel often for business, so we made it like 48 hours. If they're going to be gone that amount of time, you got to give the other parent this first right to say, I'm going to take care of the child. Don't leave them with your mom or your significant other or a babysitter or something. I want to have an opportunity to do it. And then if you say no, then you can make your own arrangements for what to do with the child. I think in some contexts it's fine, right? Like I think in most cases what I see people want that are again, I hate getting gender specific, but it's usually moms who want it because dad takes the kid at the exchange and then delivers the kid to their mom and then goes out, and then like, peace, because they're like 19, 20, etc. and or 30, I don't know, but so that's what they're doing. And so mom's like, that's ridiculous. If he's not going to stay with the child, then the child should be with me. Or he constantly leaves the child with his new girlfriend, and I don't like her. She's sketch, etc. The problem with it is it almost always goes both ways. Okay. And when you are already in a high conflict case, which usually if you need first right of refusal, you're probably in a high conflict case. The last thing you want to do is increase the number of times you have to communicate with one another and the number of times you have to see one another. And and first right of refusal does both of those. You got to communicate, hey, I'm not going to be around. And you've got to see one another. We got to exchange the child because I'm not going to be around, and you asserted your first right of refusal. So now you just exacerbated some of the acrimony in the case. The other problem is, so mom calls dad and says, I'm going to be out. Can you take care of the child? What's dad going to do? Oh, where are you going? Where are you going out? What are you doing? You hoeing around again? Just like old times, et cetera. Is it with that guy? I knew that guy was sketch. Gets into a whole conversation that is counterproductive, whereas you could just mind your own business. You have your life, they have your life. You parent during your time, they parent during their time. And part of parenting is finding someone else to supervise your children during your time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's never a good thing. I'm just saying that it's probably overused. Although I've seen it drop precipitously over the last few years. I rarely see first right of refusal orders anymore.
Oh, really? Okay.
In my area, they're not as common as they used to be.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the thing too about how the right of first refusal makes you to interact more when that's the opposite of what you wanted. And I wanted to mention that I had my divorce attorney insisted on writing everything up himself, which was great. And he did an excellent job with some of the language. But one thing that he did, because he knew that this was a high conflict situation, and he said that, I know in a lot of parenting plans, there's the issue with extracurriculars and sports, and how if you want to sign the kid up for something, you're supposed to split the cost.
Right.
And so my lawyer said, now again, my kids were a little bit older. They were like 11 and 14 when we split, but my lawyer said, I don't want you to have to go through all of that contact with your ex. Like, this is a really difficult situation. So his solution was, and it worked out beautifully, was let's just set, we have the child support set, but let's set a number that would cover like the average amount of extracurriculars per month. Then he just pays you that amount per month, and then you just do, whatever with the activities, as long as it doesn't interfere with his parenting time. And of course it didn't, because he wasn't involved with them. But that worked so beautifully for me, because so many of our people are constantly like, I'm trying to sign them up for this, and every time, I want the kids to do something, the other parent blocks me.
Yeah.
And then, so I wanted to ask you about that, but I also see it in some of the comments. and I wanted to bring this up too in that same topic, is a lot of times with medical, a difficult person will block therapy for the kids. Like they're supposed to agree on it. And then the difficult parent will be like, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I'm going to fire that therapist. And the other parent is like, my kids need help. Like, how do you deal with that? And the other thing I mentioned with the constant contact over extracurriculars.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what your attorney did on the extracurriculars is awesome. And I don't know if I've ever drafted an order like that, but I think I've seen it once before, and I think that's a really good idea. Or just coming to an agreement that you're going to split the cost of like registration, but don't get into the whole like, oh, but they also need shoes for it, and they need that for it, and cleats and shin guards, and so, you know what? Just the registration, because then the rest of it's going to just be back and forth. As for the what was the second thing? It was.
So therapy. So that's like the
yeah.
#1 issue that we get.
I have never seen an individual do very well in court that was the one trying to block therapy, because I think pretty much any family court judge is going to say, even in the most amicable of cases, it's pretty helpful for your children to see a therapist. And I had a case that I started out a couple years ago, I'm still in it, where dad and mom were having severe disagreements. There was I can't go into too much detail, but I'll just say the daughter was in very severe crisis, physically and emotionally. Because of the disagreement, the court had to make, basically what the court does at that point, whether it's mental health or even just medical care, or even dental or orthodontic care that people just can't agree on. Eventually, what the judge is just going to say is, I have to designate one of you to be the one that makes these decisions. Now, it might be all of them, or it might just be one of them. Like, I'm not going to say that you have sole legal custody, which would mean in California that you're the one that makes all the decisions about the child's health, education, and welfare. I'll keep joint legal custody, but dad makes all the decisions for healthcare, because I just have to make a call, and I think dad's the one, based on the evidence, is the one that's being a little bit more forthright about what needs to happen, and so I trust dad that they're going to make the right decisions, and so I'm going to give him exclusive authority over healthcare. But you still have joint custody, so it's joint legal custody, so you still have to collaborate on education, right? But that also happens with education. So there might be an IEP, child with special needs, and the parents can't ever agree. The IEP meetings turn into a bloodbath, and the judge has to come in and say, I'm sorry. Typically you would both have a right to be able to be involved in these decisions, but your inability to come to an agreement is causing harm to your child, regardless of which direction you take. You got to jump on one side of the fence or the other. And the conflict is more injurious than any condition this child has. So I'm going to make a call and say, it's this parent. You have sole authority. Keep them informed about what's going on, but you're the one with authority about what to do. And so it's pretty common in those cases. And in this case, mom, in the case that I was talking about before, she had got sole authority in healthcare decisions because it was just getting so bad, the kids had to have somebody make these decisions.
All right, let me ask you like a flip side of that when it gets to the extreme. So say one parent has the medical decision making, and then I'm not sure if your viewers are familiar with the term Munchausen by proxy, or do you know what that means? Okay.
I know what it means, but why don't you explain? I mean, if you want to explain it, I don't want to presume that I could be better explaining it than you are. So.
No, I mean, I never memorized definitions very well, but it's basically like with one person, like they keep taking somebody else to the doctor all the time, even when the person's not sick, and it's sort of a way to get attention, so they'll create
causing them to get a little sick, or maybe emotionally convincing them that they're maybe not making them physically sick, but emotionally convincing them, oh, well, you're sick because of this, and you have this condition, etc.
Yeah. Have you seen situations where the parent who has full decision-making for medical takes advantage and then is always taking the kids to the doctor, and then that, I mean, I know it's not very common. I just thought of it because we're talking about medical.
I've never seen anybody take advantage of it in that way. What I did have a case recently where, because usually when the court orders that, what they order is for the parent that has the authority to keep the other parent informed. They have to tell them, if it's education, right? We have an IEP meeting coming up next Wednesday, and we're going to be dealing with these issues. Did you tell dad that? Or we had the IEP meeting and the new plan is this. Did you tell? And what I find a lot is that parent with the sole authority isn't keeping the other parent informed. The problem is that typically once the court has given that other parent the authority, it's probably because the other parent is not the one that should have that authority. And so it's like, well, what's the remedy for that, right? Like, what are you really going to convince the judge that now you should have the authority because the other parent isn't telling you about what's going on? Maybe, maybe not. But I've never seen someone, though, take the authority itself and run amok and just do all kinds of stuff that run all kinds of tests or something that would have just been absurd prior to that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about agreements where, it starts off like an agreement and then one person takes advantage, but it doesn't matter. Okay. So here's one that we get a lot. Well, actually, I saw someone had put in, and this is a question that I was trying to ask you the other day about what do you do when somebody doesn't show up for their parenting time? And that's consistent. Like they just aren't there and they're basically abandoning the kids. The kids are all excited to go and the person neglects them. So how does that work moving forward? How should somebody behave?
So here's one thing I suggested to a client who had a situation like this, because the other parent only had like 10 or 20% as it was, but the kids were excited about, I'm going to see that parent this weekend, and my client was tired of getting them excited and then having them be crestfallen when it didn't happen. So rather than run off to court and change the court orders, what I had her do was send the other parent a letter, an email, saying that, the last 3 times we went for the visit, you were not there for the exchange. And you've not given me any communications about when you're going to start resuming the parenting schedule that we had. So I'm not going to be showing up for the exchange this Friday or whatever day it is. Tell me when you will, once you confirm for me that you will be at the exchange location at the time when we're supposed to have the exchange, then I will be there with the kids. But until you do, I'm not going to be there. And then that way, you're not unilaterally flaunting the court orders, right? You're not just like violating the court order, not showing up because they don't show up. And why should you show up? You're showing that what you're really concerned is the best interest of the kids, because they're having this excitement about going and then they're disappointed because dad doesn't show up. And you're keeping dad, or I'm sorry, I'm using these genders. I try not to, but I slide into it. But the other parent doesn't show up. Oh, thanks for the sunglasses. And the other parent doesn't show up. And you're keeping that other parent in the loop. You're being like, hey, I respect that there's a court order. And I'm ready and willing to make sure that you have that parenting time when you're ready to show up. Until you do, can confirm for me, at least in writing, that you're going to be there, then I'm not going to do it. Now, if it goes on for months, a year, 2 years, and I've had people say this to me, like, what should I do? Then I think, you can, well, the email should take care of it, right? Now what happens if 2 years later they email you and they go, oh, now I want to do it this coming weekend? I think it would be completely acceptable to ask them for an explanation. Where you been? And just say, well, look, I don't feel comfortable doing the exchange this weekend when you've been MIA for 2 years. I have no idea where you've been, what you've been doing. I'd like an explanation. And without one, take me to court. See what the judge says. Because the judge isn't going to come down on a parent that is not delivering the kids to a parent who hasn't been there for 2 years. I'm sorry. Find me that judge that says, no, I expected you to go after the parent went MIA for 2 years, I still expect you to go to that exchange and leave the kids with them for the weekend.
Yeah, and I think it all comes back to that appearing reasonable. You're appearing to be reasonable, and I like what you said about the email communication as well, because it documents the behavior, it documents a pattern of behavior over time, and it also gives the other side an opportunity to respond. So if they're trying to document something and it's completely false, then the other guys can say, "Oh, that's not true. Of course I've been there. I've been waiting for you. You never showed up with the kids." But if they don't say anything, I would think that email chain or that specific email can be hopefully entered into evidence because you wrote it to the person, they had the opportunity to respond, they received it, and there it is. It's not a he said, she said.
Yeah, and I see someone ask, wouldn't that put that parent in contempt? Doubtful. But if you're that worried about it, if you really think the parent who's been, mind you, has been gone for 2 years, couldn't even get the energy to get in their car and show up to the McDonald's to pick up their kids for 2 years, does have the energy to go into court and file a contempt against you. If they're that kind of person, then sure, go to court and change the court orders yourself. Don't wait for them. Go ahead and go to court yourself if you're really worried about that. But I would say that's probably going to be a really rare case that parent's going to do that.
Yeah. Okay, here's a big one that we get. A lot of times, one parent will try to turn the other, high conflict cases, turn the other child against the parent. And our people who are going through divorce are like, I want to write a parenting plan to make sure that this doesn't happen. Like, I want to put in the parenting plan that person's not allowed to badmouth me. They're not allowed to say these things. We're not allowed to discuss the divorce. Like, how does that fly in real life?
You can put the provisions in there, and they're part of, there's a form here in California. We call them additional physical custody orders. I think it's FL 341D is the one with the custody orders. And there's like little check boxes for little things like, no smoking around the kids, and have to notify parents of proposed move and stuff like that. And you can check these boxes and stuff. And one of them is, you shall not make disparaging comments about the other. You shall not make disparaging comments about the other parent in the children's presence, nor shall you allow others to do so. You can check the box, and I do. I put it in the order. I mean, it's a solid order. The problem, of course, is enforcement. It's really hard. I've brought the issue up a few times in litigation when I had some evidence, but the problem is that the best evidence you're ever going to have is your own child making the statement, and then the question becomes, how do you get that statement in? It's a challenge. Do they tell the mediator? Okay, well, it's still hearsay, but at least it's in the mediation report. Maybe there's minors counsel appointed, and they tell minors counsel, well, it's still hearsay, but minors counsel is still going to probably let the court know about it. So it's hard to prove, but I think what you might be better off doing is having an experienced child custody counselor come on and talk about that issue. I'd like to watch that and hear what they say. Someone who does like real in-depth custody evaluations, we call them 3111 evaluations here in California. How do they suss it out, the alienation? Because it is hard, but I know one thing that they look out for. There's a few telltale signs, right? There's certain things that you're listening for to sort of indicate that it's happening. One thing that probably the primary thing is that the kid is echoing things to the mediator or to the court that the other parent has already said about that parent in court. And that's a real strong signal that they're saying those things in the household. So it's pretty obvious. So that's one thing.
I thought you were going to say another one. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, it's hard. Sometimes the kids just tell you themselves. Like I had a case where I had mom, and it was mom's visits that were being supervised. She was an alcoholic, and she had significant issues with alcoholism and PTSD, and probably one probably had a significant relationship with the other. But so her visits were being supervised, and the the daughter was coming to the supervised visits and basically saying to the supervisor, talking to her about things that communications from her mom that her father showed her from his phone. It was the Our Family Wizard communications, and saying, and the supervisor was like, "How do you know that?" She's like, "Well, my father showed me the what my mom said on Our Family Wizard about that." I was like, "Wow, that's you know." And what I mean by that is, so stuff will come out to other people. Oftentimes, kids will say things to other people about the other parent. They'll repeat it, they'll parrot it to other people, the things that they're being told in the household. So there's probably some other ways too, but that's why I'm saying I think having somebody who's an expert on that issue on might be a really good live in the future. I
Yeah,
know
yeah, I wrote it
I'll
down.
watch it.
Yeah,
Or maybe I'll do it.
well,
I don't know. Maybe one of us should do it.
yeah,
That'd be
yeah,
great.
we'll start looking. So, but then the
Yeah.
question becomes, okay, so say it's established,
Hmm.
what are the consequences? Really?
It
Like
depends on how bad
right.
it it depends on how bad it is and the extent of the alienation, but typically what you would see is a reversal of custody. So if you have a 50-50, then the other parent's going to be given primary. They're going to be given the child, and that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I mean, it's parental alienation is a problem that family court has yet to figure out how to address. So if
Hmm.
you're expecting that a family court judge or even a family court mediator has the answer, I'm sorry, they don't. I don't. And I've never seen a judge have the appropriate answer. I had a case a couple years ago where we went to trial, very long trial, 2 weeks, number of expert witnesses, and after the trial, we won. We proved it. Dad was alienating the son from my client, and we were victorious. And the judge ordered the child with my client 100% of the time, with dad, for like some therapy sessions and stuff like that. Kid was 13 at the time, and it was a nightmare for my client. So bad that eventually she ended up just agreeing to a 50-50. And I think eventually, after I was out of the case, I think the kid ended up with dad most of the time anyway, because by that point, the alienation was so bad. The child was so, I mean, he was verbally violent with my client, and her significant other, who was a big part of the case and one of the reasons for the alienation, that it wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth it. After all the money and time and energy that was spent on getting these orders, it just wasn't worth it. The damage had already been unfortunately done. So it's,
Yeah,
and then you
yeah.
have these. You've seen the news where you have these camps. I don't know if you've seen these parental alienation camps. The New York Times did a huge expose on it like 5 or 6 years ago. They had them here in California. They were in like Napa, Sonoma area, where they'd send the kids to camp. The judge would. There was a famous story about the judge like sent the kids to this camp and said, "You're not getting out of the camp until I, the judge, am satisfied that you have a positive relationship with your father." And the kids were devastated, and it never worked. And they ended up, they actually interviewed them because they were adults by the time this report came out, to say how horrible it was and about being forced to do it. They were like, we weren't alienated from dad. Dad was just an asshole, and we didn't want to be around him. So that wasn't an answer. So what's the answer? I don't know. That's why it's such a scourge in the family court system, parental alienation, because there's very little. It's hard to prove, and even when you prove it, it's hard to resolve. So
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too with that case because We find a lot of times when kids are around 13 or 14, it's they'll sometimes align. We did a whole, we've done a few Instagram lives on this with therapists and things, but they'll align with the abusive parent and they've been manipulated already. A lot of times a toxic parent will be much more lax with discipline, and teenagers want to do whatever they want. So if they have one parent who's trying to enforce rules and boundaries and parent, and another one who's like, do whatever you want, I'll give you all the money you want, I'll buy you expensive gifts, like they'll go in that direction. And it's just heartbreaking, for a lot of parents.
I'll even get, I've never talked about this on TikTok. I'll even get a little personal about it. I don't talk that much about my own life, but when I was a kid, my parents got divorced. I was 9 when my parents separated. And there were a lot of arguments that happened between, like last year, just like a lot of divorces, right? It boils up and then there's the break. And so my room was right next to my parents' room. I had my older brother and older sister. I was the youngest, but my room, obviously, I was the youngest. So I was closest to my parents. So I heard every word, every single word, and everything that was thrown and everything that was broken during these arguments. And I don't want to blame either one of my parents, but they characterize these arguments later to me in their own way. I don't think either one of them, okay. I think one of them was true. And I know now, I learned later as an adult that one of my parents was not being honest with me about, they were telling me that they were being abused. And that's why I heard these noises, these crashes, and these loud bangs and stuff. And I learned later that they were never physically abused. In fact, the things that were thrown and the things that were crashed, they were the ones throwing them. They were the ones crashing them because they were in a emotional distress over probably the end of their marriage. And it was very difficult for me as a child because to learn this stuff later as a close to adult child, because I had aligned myself with this parent my whole life, partly because of my perception of the other parent. Not only, okay, that other parent did plenty of other things, but partly because of the narrative that I had in my head about those arguments and physical violence that I thought had taken place, but I learned later didn't take place. And so I confronted that parent, and they admitted it and said, yes, that never happened. I'd like that, and I'm sorry that I'd said that. But I was desperate, and I thought you were going to want to stay with the other parent, and that's why I did it, and I'm not proud of it. And I forgave them. I moved on, but it had a significant effect on me, and that was my perception of that parent for years and years and years until I learned that. And what I always hope is that these kids in these situations where they're being alienated, I really hope that they do go on as adults and learn the truth and are able to, and I think that's one of the reasons my client in that other case gave up, because I think what she was trying to salvage was her mature relationship with her child, that eventually they would have a more adult relationship. But if she pushed the issue too much, that might not happen. And so it is, like I said, it's a scourge. It's horrible that anybody would ever do that to their child, but they do.
Yeah. Brian, I almost want to end it right here because that is so powerful. And it's also something that I know our people like really worry about all the time when this happens, and they're heartbroken and they see the child aligning with the one, and it's like there's no way for them to tell the truth. There's no way to convince the child, and they think the relationship is over for good. But the truth does come out later, and it's devastating. And I know at the beginning of the end with my marriage, some excellent advice I got from someone in like Al-Anon, which I was told to go to, even though I didn't even know what was going on. Mm-hmm. They said, I didn't know about narcissism. I didn't know whatever the other addictions were. But anyway, Al-Anon was just a great group to learn to emotionally detach from the conflict. And one of the questions I had said was like, how do I explain to my kids what's going on? Like, how did I tell them about the divorce? And somebody said, you have to tell the kids the truth, because if you don't tell them the truth and they find out later, they will be completely re-traumatized.
Yeah.
So, and that almost sounds like something like what you went through, you know, having to like rewrite reality.
Yes,
You know?
exactly. You're the what happened is not what you thought was happening. It's almost like one of those movies where there's alternate things that happened, and you know, I just saw The Last Duel with the one with Matt Damon and Adam Driver, and there's like 3 different versions of what happened, and yeah, it changes your whole perspective on such a large part of your life, right? Your childhood, a fundamental part of your life, and to find out later that part of it, not all of it, but the significant part of it was a lie. That's not okay, and it does it. I think I like how you put that, where it sort of re-traumatizes you in a way, and if it doesn't re-traumatize you, it at least it makes you. It's something you have to address emotionally, or else you can't, you know, move on productively with other parts of your life. So, why do that to your kid? Why put them in that situation? Like, just be honest with them. Not too honest. They don't need to know everything, but
Right.
what's appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Brian, I don't want to say anything after this. Like I started saying before, it's
Well,
like so
it's a good place
powerful.
to
I
stop.
think we should, yeah, it's a good place to stop, and we'll definitely get together for other things too.
Absolutely.
More,
Absolutely.
more
Yeah, let's
topics.
do that. And
And save the video for me.
I will save the video for you, and we will figure out how to do it so that we're co-hosting next time. That will
Yes.
be my goal. We'll figure that out, and I'm happy to come on your IG anytime. So just let me know.
Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. So
Thanks
thanks
so
so
much. Good
much.
seeing you. Thanks, and thanks everybody that's been on here. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you
All right,
later.
Lisa. All right, you too.
Bye.